In part one of the quiet pullback, we talked about the moment you realized you started sharing less, not because you stopped caring, but because openness began to cost more than silence. We looked at the grief of still being connected to someone while knowing they no longer have access to every part of you. But there's another side to this, because sometimes what begins as protection can slowly become disconnection. And that's where we're going today. Sometimes the quiet pullback is self-protection. And self-protection is not a character flaw. If every conversation leaves you feeling dismissed, unseen, questioned into doubt, or responsible for explaining why something matters, then maybe your silence is not immaturity. Maybe it's discernment. Not every relationship needs full access to you, and that does not require you to turn someone into a villain. It doesn't mean that relationship was fake or that you have to rewrite every good memory. But it does mean that you are allowed to see what is true. You are allowed to say, this person can be in my life, but they do not need to know all aspects of it. That could be a really rough conclusion to make, but it can also give you insight. Because once you name that, you stop measuring the relationship by what you hoped it could become. You start seeing it by what it has actually shown you it can hold. And that can be painful, but also relieving. Unfortunately, there's another side to this, because sometimes what begins as protection can slowly become disconnection. And this is worth paying attention to. At first, maybe you only stopped sharing with one person. That makes sense. There was a pattern, so there was a reason. But then, after enough experiences like that, you may start giving everyone the shorter version of yourself. You may stop explaining because explaining feels exhausting. You may have stopped reaching out because you associated it with disappointment. You may become very good at seeming fine. And to someone watching from the outside, that can look like peace. But inside, it might be grief. It might be the ache of realizing that what you have been calling low maintenance is actually a fortress built by hiding the parts of you that need care. That is not easy to admit, because low maintenance can sound flattering. It can sound strong, steady, uncomplicated. But sometimes I don't need much really means I learned to stop asking. I'm fine can mean I don't trust others with anything more honest. It's okay can mean I already decided it will hurt less if I stop expecting more. And that is where the quiet pullback becomes complicated. Silence can protect your softness, but sometimes silence can become the place where your softness disappears. Both can be true. That is why this episode is not simply about pulling away from people who hurt you. It's about noticing what the pullback is doing inside of you. And at some point, the question stops being only, why do they keep doing this? And it becomes, what have I started doing so I don't have to feel that again? That's a far deeper level. You start rehearsing that disappointment before the conversation even happens. And maybe you prepare the shorter version in your head, deciding what parts you're going to omit. And that looks and feels like self-protection. That is why it's so easy to miss. You're still present. You're still showing up. You're not being rude. but you're also not arriving whole. And it is tiring in a way that is so hard to describe because no one sees how much of yourself you had to remove before you even entered the conversation. And I think a lot of us have had that moment. Something happens and you realize, I would have told him that before. Still, you don't. And you just sit with it. Maybe you tell someone else. Maybe you just write it down. Maybe you keep it between you and God. Maybe you carry it silently because you are not even sure where it belongs anymore. And part of you may miss the old version of yourself, the version that shared easily when you assumed people cared. You can miss that version of yourself and still understand why you changed. You can grieve the openness you used to have and still respect the reason it became more guarded. And maybe that grief is not only about them. Maybe it's also about you, about how much energy it took to keep translating your own heart for places that kept misunderstanding the language. That does not mean you were wrong to hope. It means you wanted to be known. You wanted to bring the real thing and not have to water it down first. There is nothing wrong with that. But there's also nothing wrong with realizing that some places cannot hold the real thing gently enough. And once you realize that, access may need to change. Not as punishment, as protection. Before we close, if this episode put language to something you have been carrying quietly, you're not alone in that. And if you know someone who has been trying to understand why certain relationships feel close on the outside, but lonely on the inside, this may be worth sharing with them. And if you want to become part of the Caffeine and Clarity family, feel free to subscribe to stay connected. Share in the comments what you're going through and what you'd like to hear. You can also support us by buying me a coffee or picking yourself up something from our shop. So maybe the question isn't, should I open back up? That's far too simple. The better question may be, what is my quiet trying to tell me? Is it pointing toward a boundary? Is it showing me where someone has a limited capacity? Is it revealing that I have been asking someone to meet me deeply when they've only shown me that they cannot? Or is it showing you something else completely? Maybe that you're tired. Maybe that you're scared. Maybe that you have started using silence not only to protect yourself, but to disappear, to isolate. There are so many different answers, and all of those answers matter because it matters to you. The goal is not to become unreachable. The goal is to become more honest. Honest about where you feel safe. Honest about where you have been disappointed. Honest about where you have confused silence with healing. Because silence can be helpful, but silence can also hide grief. It can hide resentment. It can hide that part of you that still wants to be known, but is tired of asking. And that part deserves care too. Notice where you have gone quiet, not to shame yourself, but to understand it. Instead of blaming yourself, ask what happened. Your quiet may be carrying information. It may be telling you where a boundary is needed. It may be telling you where acceptance is needed. And it may be telling you where you have been waiting for someone to become someone they may not be able to become. And yeah, that can hurt. But it can also release you from trying so hard to make a connection look closer than it actually feels. You don't have to pretend the distance came from nowhere. You don't have to pretend to reopen every door just because someone finally noticed it was closed. But maybe you can ask yourself two honest questions. What is this distance protecting? And what is this distance costing me? One question honors the boundary, the other protects that part of you that still wants to be known. And somewhere between the two, there may be clarity. Not the kind that makes everything simple, but the kind that helps you stop abandoning yourself just to keep the connection looking closer than it really feels. Here's your sip of the day. Sometimes distance begins with the moment you realize sharing has started to cost more than silence. And sometimes the quiet pullback isn't you becoming cold. It's the part of you that still wants to be known, learning to stop handing itself to places that only half receives it. Until the next episode, this is Caffeine and Clarity.